Being a teenage shooter fan in the mid to late 2000s was awesome. Whether you were 360 or PS3, you had plenty to choose from. Gears of War and Halo on the Xbox, Uncharted and Killzone on the PS3, and Call of Duty and Battlefield were on both. I was a 360 kid and I met many of my online friends there, and I still game with many of them today. So even back in the day when these consoles reigned supreme, nobody I knew had a Wii. The Nintendo Wii was seen as this casual, family-friendly gaming console. Shooters and mature games in general just weren't very common. Sure, the Wii had stripped-down versions of Call of Duty and the excellent Metroid Prime series, but where were the original third-party shooters at? Well, enter the Conduit. The Conduit was a game my friends and I would rant and rave over, saying how badly we wanted to try it out. On the surface, it looks awesome. Alien invasion, a unique control scheme, sci-fi weapons, but as you begin to play, you start to see something much more sinister brewing under the surface. And so, today I'm going to fulfill that teenage wish by playing The Conduit and its sequel.
The Conduit, only on the Wii, rated T for teen.
The Conduit released on June 29th, 2009 exclusively for the Wii. The game wastes no time in dropping you right into the action. You play as former Secret Service agent Michael Ford, a man who is newly inducted into the Trust. The Trust is sort of like this secret society that pulls all the strings, sort of like an Illuminati, I guess. The Trust is led by a man named John Adams, who sends Michael Ford to DC to help quell a rebellious uprising. While you're there, Adams tasks you with finding the All-Seeing Eye, or the ASE for short. The ASE is trust technology that has some gameplay implications that I'll get into a bit later. As the fighting continues, Adams betrays you, and so the rebel leader Prometheus reaches out to help you. So for the remainder of the game, you're attempting to stop the Trust, Adams, and the Drudge from killing the president and destroying DC. The Drudge are the aliens that I briefly mentioned earlier who use portals to move their forces quickly around the area, so hence the title, The Conduit. I'm not gonna spoil any more of the game right this second because I did find the story to be very interesting. There are plenty of twists and turns to keep you interested. I'll talk more about it when I discuss the sequel. So getting into the gameplay side of things, the game is a standard first-person shooter outside of its control scheme. You have plenty of weapons at your disposal. Each faction has their own. Humans, Drudge, and Trust weaponry are all able to be picked up and used. Humans have typical military shooter weaponry, so MP5K, SCAR, SPAS-12, you get the idea. The Drudge use these weird bio-organic weapons that have some downright strange reload animations. The Trust use plasma weapons with a similar lineup of weaponry to the humans, except instead of bullets, it's plasma. I quite like the lineup of guns, and I found myself using the Drudge weapons the most out of all three of them. Some of my favorites were the Hive Cannon. This thing fires so fast and does a ton of damage. Its reload animation involves putting an egg sack into the front of it, and it sort of just like engulfs the sack. It's so weird. And the strike rifle was a common weapon, and I used it quite a bit. It acts like a semi-auto rifle and does decent damage over range. The reload animation is pretty cool too, so Ford rips the gun open, kind of like cracking it in half, and replaces this empty biomass with a fresh one. But if you guys know me, you know that I have to judge the game based on its shotguns, so what did I think of the Conduit SPAS-12? It's okay. It doesn't sound great. To be honest, none of the human weapons do sound good in this game, and I guess it has okay range. It's nothing special really, I sort of just forced myself to use it just because I love shotguns. The Conduit is broken up into 9 different levels, all beginning and ending with a cutscene or a lore-heavy dialogue. You'll be fighting various humans, members of the Trust, and the Drudge. I found that the humans in the Trust were the most fun to fight, as the Drudge will reproduce. Yeah, not respawn, reproduce. There are egg sacs that are mounted to walls in most of the levels, and if you don't destroy these quickly enough, they will hatch different enemies. They will hatch more and more. Most of these enemies were just beyond annoying to fight, and there's one that's blue that runs right into you and just smacks you endlessly with no cooldown in between. Get a group of these guys around you and you're done, it's over. There's also these red ones, and they'll roll up into you and they'll open their arms up wide and detonate. They'll explode. These enemies were just so fucking annoying. I died so many times to them. They have to be in consideration when talking about the most annoying enemies of all time. And on top of this, you'll have enemies firing at you from afar with whatever weapons they have equipped. The grunts typically have the strike rifle, but as you move on to the larger enemies, the tanks, they have the Hive Cannon. which I said earlier is an awesome drudge weapon, but it's not fun to be on the other side of. You can sort of see where my frustrations are with the Conduit, and it doesn't end there. Sometimes you'll come across a door that has some kind of biolock on it, and these will have these little dots on the door to signify how many nodes you have to scan. The ASC I mentioned earlier is used for puzzle solving. I use puzzle solving in a very loose sense because essentially what you're doing to unlock these doors is walking around a room, scanning every wall you come across, and scanning these little yellow nodes. And oh yeah, sometimes enemies can still spawn out of vents or whatever it might be to attack you while you're trying to do this. And on top of this, they have in the game what they call ghost mines. Ghost mines are hardly recognizable with the naked eye, but the intention is for you to scan the mine with the ASC and blow it up before you proceed. Again, the problem is that enemies are able to run right through them and attack you while you try to disarm them. The ASC takes so long to actually disarm them, and they don't blow up in sequence. You have to scan every single last one. Sometimes you'll have 5 or more mines to scan. Now you might ask, why not just quick switch to your weapon and take them out and then continue? Well, the game utilizes the Wii's nunchuck and Motion Plus Wiimote. Motion controls in general are sort of like a bad word these days, but going into the game, I wanted to give it the benefit. So you control your crosshair on screen by simply pointing the Wiimote at the screen and pressing B to fire, which is located on the underside of the Wiimote, so that's pretty intuitive, right? To throw grenades, you simply point where you want to throw it and then flick the nunchuck forward. Also pretty intuitive, but this is sort of where the controls began the nosedive for me. To reload your weapon, you press the minus button here on the left. Not the best, not the worst, but at least you can reach it. Now, to switch weapons, aim down sights, or to switch grenade types, you have to use the D-pad. So if your hand is in a position to pull the B trigger button, you're not in a position to press the D-pad. You have to essentially move your entire hand to press these buttons. Quick switching in the middle of combat is not really an option, and I got killed many times in the middle of a reload or a weapon switch. There just isn't time to fumble around with the controls while in combat or while using the ASC. It's essentially trial and error, so sometimes you'll be faced with ghost mines that block a path you have to walk on. Now, there are egg sacs that endlessly spawn enemies in an area that you cannot shoot from your current position. So, yeah, I hope you're seeing the issue here before I spell it out for you. So essentially the choice I made was to use the ASC and blow up a mine, take a little bit of damage from these guys, kill the enemies that showed up, and rinse and repeat until I got through with a minefield. This is extremely tedious and one of my largest issues with the Conduit. On top of this, if you haven't noticed already, the performance just isn't up to snuff. The Conduit runs extremely poorly, and it makes aiming and successfully defeating targets a major chore. So not only am I fighting with the motion controls, I'm fighting against hordes of enemies that move frantically around and don't settle into position. This made it even more frustrating. I was dying more and more as the game went on. As the game threw more enemies and more intricate level design at me, the performance continued to tank and I gave up. I don't go into a video on this channel with the expectation that I'm not going to finish a game. I have zero interest in putting up clickbaity garbage or whatever, but this game straight up broke me. I had no idea it was going to be this bad performance-wise when I got into it. It may not look too bad on the screen you're watching, but playing it was a different story. It was almost like I was suspended in jello or something. Nothing about this game felt tight or responsive. It's a shame too, because I really like the premise of the Conduit. I like the idea that Wii owners were finally getting a mature first-person shooter in the vein of something like Halo. I suppose if I only had a Wii, this game would have been fine, and maybe I would have been used to the motion controls. You have to remember, this is my first real experience with the Wii, and I had never played a shooter on it before this video. Now, apparently the Conduit did well enough to get a sequel. The sequel, titled Conduit 2, was released on April 19th, 2011. The game continues the story right off the ending of the first. So essentially, without spoiling too much, I want to talk briefly about this one. So the leader of the Trust, John Adams, is still alive and the organization is still operating globally. Adams is seeking out progenitors, or people of great lineage, to drain their powers and strengthen himself with them. As time goes on, it becomes apparent that Michael Ford is going to need to also do this to defeat Adams, although he isn't willingly killing the progenitors like Adams. Also changing from the first game are the Drudge, who have split into 2 factions. The Free Drudge work alongside Ford to complete tasks, while the rest continue to serve the Trust. That's all I'm gonna say for this one, because this game was absolutely batshit crazy compared to the first, and you have to experience it for yourself. If I tell it to you, you won't believe it. The first thing I noticed about Conduit 2 was the change in voice actors. These guys got Duke Nukem himself, John St. John, to voice Michael Ford, and I love the change. Ford in the first game was this gritty, serious, boring, bland character, whereas Ford in the second is this wisecracking asshole. He'll spout off funny remarks during combat that really show this game's age.
Epic fail!
The dialogue in general is much more relaxed and less serious than the first, which for me made it more enjoyable. The plot is already ridiculous, why not double down with the dialogue too, you know?
Prometheus! Show yourself, you traitor!
It might be a good idea not to mention my presence right now.
Most of the weapons return from the first game, but some have different functionalities and alternate fire modes. My favorite weapon in Conduit 2 was the Scar. Now in the first game it was so unremarkable I didn't even bother mentioning it. It was a triple burst rifle that allowed you to scope in, which didn't really help. Now in Conduit 2 it has multiple fire modes. If you hip fire, it's full auto. However, if you scope in, it's a single fire weapon that'll even headshot grunts in one shot. Conduit 2 does feature some new weapons too, and my favorite of the bunch was the ARC Eclipse. What's cool about this weapon is that it has unlimited ammo first off, but if you hold the trigger down you go invisible for a short period of time. This allows you to get out of sticky situations or just cool down a nearly overheated weapon quickly. It's not as strong as the Scar however, and so I didn't use it as much, but still, it's pretty cool. There are plenty of other improvements to talk about in Conduit 2 and I want to highlight a few of those now. In the first game you had to replenish your ammunition at faction specific locations, so many times you'd have to keep swapping your weapons with whatever you could find on the ground. In this one, all ammo comes from one crate, and these are very commonly found throughout levels. Conduit 2 also introduces some proper boss fights, where they have specific attack patterns that you have to learn and avoid. I really liked the Leviathan boss early on, and so some people are going to look at this and see a turret sequence. I see a massive improvement in scope from the first game. In the first game, you were just walking from the same looking hallway to the next. There was very little variety outside of the mines and door locks I mentioned earlier. However, with Conduit 2, you have boss fights, you have scripted action sequences, you have this goofy dialogue I mentioned. It makes for a much more enjoyable experience overall. You may have noticed already, but the single biggest improvement over the first game is the introduction of alternative controllers. Now, I went into Conduit 2 with the expectation that it was going to be another motion controlled game, but hopefully with some fine tuning and improvements over the first. I told myself, I'm gonna go in and complete the first 2 levels like this, and then I'll check out the traditional controls. I didn't even make it 10 minutes and I already was plugging in my Wii Classic controller. The difference really is night and day. It feels a bit clunky compared to shooters even from its day, but it's serviceable. It's leaps and bounds better than the motion controls, and I didn't struggle nearly as much to line up headshots. The game also removed those annoying door locks and the annoying ghost mines, as well as speeding up the time it takes to scan things with the ASE. So what exactly is the problem with Conduit 2? Well, one major issue has unfortunately returned from the first game, and that's the performance. The game just chugs, sometimes even worse than the first. There was a point in the game where I couldn't even continue just because the performance was so damn bad. The level design didn't help either and just made the experience more frustrating. So let me explain what made this so infuriating for me. You'd walk up to this arena and kill these enemies, which in itself I thought was difficult. Once you clear them out, you have to take an elevator to the next floor. As soon as you reach the top, you're being shot at from both sides, and these mechanical dog enemies are chomping at you constantly with little downtime between them. Now if you get this far, you have to take another elevator up to where you get swarmed by enemies again. No checkpoints this entire time. If you die, you're restarting at the ground floor. It was such a frustrating and deflating experience for me as the player. I decided at this point that I had seen enough and I wasn't going to finish the game. It was time for me to move on. And that's such a shame for me too. I really wanted to enjoy Conduit 2 because there are so many improvements over the first. And like I stated earlier, I try my best to complete games for this channel. I feel like I don't have the greatest grasp of a game if I don't complete it, but with the Conduit, I felt like I had seen most of what was on display. After looking at the ending, I'm sort of relieved I didn't finish it. The game, like the first one, ends on a cliffhanger. But unlike the first one though, there's no resolution here. There never was a Conduit 3. Conduit 2 sold very poorly and didn't meet sales expectations, and so the franchise was put on the chopping block. Back in the day, the Conduit was a game that got me and my friends talking. The excitement, the unknown, the idea of this motion-controlled shooter was so bizarre to us as 360 guys. It was so new. But nowadays, as I played through both, I do wish I would have left the games in the past. I sort of spoiled my own childhood legend. The Conduit and its sequel just don't hold up with the times, especially when there are amazing motion-controlled shooters in the VR space today. I would not recommend the Conduit or its sequel to anyone outside of the curious few. Do yourself a favor and stay away from these.
Epic fail!
Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you want to see me cover more Wii games. I try not to be too negative on this channel, but I just couldn't with this game. There were very few positives for me to see. So anyways, recommendation time. My most recent video, Red Dead Revolver, blew up big time, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend doing so. It's a very good video. I'm very proud of it. Speaking of another video I'm very proud of, I put a lot of work into the Beautiful Joe video, and I also recommend that one too. Thank you again for your continued support, and I hope you have a great day.